Good morning, everyone. My name is Brent. I'm the host for Canadians with Disabilities and their Allies. I'm excited to announce that I have Sonia Furstenau and Adam Olsen on from the Green Party of BC. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. It's such a great pleasure, Sonia and Adam, both of you, for coming on. The tag team, the Green Tag Team, I call you. Great.
Yeah.
I really envy all your advocacy for both of you for everything that you do in the legislature to try to make things better for British Columbians. So I just want to quickly say that right off the top, and it's always a great pleasure having you both on. I thought, wow, and when your secretary reached out and said, "I'll have you both on at the same time," I was like, wow, this is great.
A 2-for-1 deal. 100% of the BC Green Caucus joining you this morning.
Exactly.
And we're delighted to be here.
I'm going to start with you first, Sonia, and then we'll get Adam on as a speaker. Of course, with the environment going on, how bad it is, the air quality in Metro Vancouver, it is so bad. Like Metro Vancouver, Eastern Fraser Valley is even worse. This morning it's rated at 10 plus, which is extremely, extremely bad. I'm in Victoria, not too far from where you are. I mean, the air quality here is about 4 on the scale, so it's not too bad. I mean, it's breathable. But I feel very sad for people that are homeless or people with disabilities or underlying health conditions that maybe don't have access to air purifiers or AC, more air purifiers than anything to clean the air because they're very expensive and they're just not accessible for people. I mean, to definitely not to afford. I know that the current government that's in power, they had mentioned about making things more accessible for people in their housing, about air purifiers, and that really hasn't happened. So I just wanted your take on that topic first.
I think we're seeing more and more the ways in which climate change affects people differently. And that we've seen with the events that have happened just in the last 12 months. If you think about it, the heat dome, the atmospheric river, the wildfires, the drought, and now we are here with yet again, and in late October, ongoing heat, but also the wildfire smoke. The people with the least resources are, of course, least able to, as you say, Brent, have air purifiers in their housing, be able to afford to take those steps that help address these changes. And we have to look at climate impacts as being something that governments need to embed their actions in equity and justice. And so ensuring that housing has built into it air conditioners and air purifiers, that people can have the expectation of clean air and refuge from these impacts. It's something we're talking about a lot this week and these days, is the kind of lack of urgency on action on climate change and the lack of real awareness that these impacts are much, much harder for people who are living with disabilities or living in poverty. So
I'm going to reach over to Adam here. Hi, good morning, Adam.
Nice to be with you again, Brent.
I'm going to just talk a little bit about housing affordability in British Columbia. As we all know, in British Columbia and across Canada, housing affordability has just skyrocketed. In the private sector, I call them in privately owned REITs, which they're definitely taking advantage of the market on how high that they want to price the rents when somebody moves out of their unit. I'll give you an example. So if I were to move out of my unit and move across the hall into another unit, the landlord would be jumping up and down with joy, probably even buying me a cake and saying thank you so much, right? Because they could get another $600 a month in for rent on my unit and not even doing no renovations. But the government, current government touts that, we're capping the rents at 2.5%. However, that doesn't do like a rent control. I'm kind of torn about the rent control. Like, it's like yes and no. Like, I mean, it could be good, but it could also be a bad thing too, right? So I kind of wanted your take about that part. And the other part is about keeping people housed. So the other question is As we all know about the shelter rate for persons with disabilities in the province of BC, it's still historically at 15 years and 6 months. It hasn't been changed. Now, I advocate so strongly on that, but what I would like to have that increase. But what I think, and I wanted your view, and I mean, and Sonia, you could maybe chime in on that too. But having that 375 equation completely eliminated right out of the equation, so that when a person gets their full check, which they do anyway, if they're housed, they pay the rent to whoever. Like if they find, say, their rents are so high right now, if they find, say, somewhere they can stay for a month or 2 months, and they pay roommates or whoever is living there, they pay them 500, $600 and say, hey, I've got a roof over my head. But the government looks at it as if you don't have a fixed address, you do not get your full check. We will take that 375 away from you. In Alberta, I had one of my other fellow advocates said in Alberta, they don't have that equation in it, that you get your check and if you want to live in your car, you live in your car. You want to live in a tent, which I don't advise people to live in a tent, but I mean, to eliminate homelessness, I think that should be eliminated. Anyway, I wanted your view on that.
You've given me a lot to break down here. I think first, I just want to talk about the REITs. I think what we've seen in the housing market is the financialization, basically the commodification of housing over a number of decades. This is across Canada.
Yeah.
Here in British Columbia as well is no different. With the federal government kind of extracting themselves from building non-market or out-of-market housing, housing co-ops and rental housing buildings, and subsidizing and providing the capital in order for those buildings to be built. What we've seen is housing increasingly out of reach for people, and this has become a huge issue. I just received and dealt with a few emails this morning from a constituent of mine that is, outlining a really devastating situation that they're facing. And this is not unique. This is something that we deal with in our constituency offices, or I should put that we have to address in our constituency offices on a regular basis. And with the large investment trusts starting to buy up those aging buildings, that is now we're now seeing. We now have a couple of things going on. One, the provincial and federal government have not been building new buildings, so we're not keeping pace, I would say, with the need. In addition, now investment trusts are purchasing the buildings that housing stock, those homes that were available, are now being purchased up by investment firms that have no interest for the people inside, other than whether or not they can pay ever increasingly devastating high levels of rent, because it's economics. It's shareholders' profits that those investment trusts are looking at pleasing, not the homefulness of our society, which is what those buildings initially were built for. We need federal and provincial governments to be building non-market housing solutions, and so where the provincial government has invested, as an example, the Housing Hub, $2 billion of our money and taxpayer money into the housing market, should not be going, in my opinion, in our opinion, should not be going to for-profit, the market housing solutions, because we're seeing that those buildings that are being built by that capital that's being subsidized by the public, those rents are not. It might be attainable, but they're not affordable, and people are still paying way more than what they can afford to pay. And this is, Brent, right across the full spectrum of housing. When it comes to rent control, I was on the rental housing task force, and there was this tension, healthy and unhealthy tension between. Actually, here, before I move on, let me just say this one thing. I think the provincial government needs to be aggressively working with the federal government to stop REITs, the real estate investment trusts, from being allowed to purchase these buildings. There is also, I think, single-family homes, REITs that are purchasing single-family homes and renting them out. I think that our provincial government needs to be far more aggressive with the federal government than they have been to put an end to this, because it is threatening housing stock that we absolutely need to maintain some semblance of housing for a wide range of people in our society. So I just wanted to close that
Yeah.
door. I'll just say with respect to the tension between, most of the housing stock in our rental housing in our society comes in the secondary housing market. These are, people that have purchased a single family home and they're renting a basement suite or they're renting the top floor, and they're either, living in the building, and they are, it's not a business. It's a mortgage helper in some cases. That's a
Hmm.
vast majority of the housing and rental housing that's out there. It became very evident in those conversations back in 2018 when I was on the rental housing task force that
Yeah.
we need to be careful in balancing the needs for those folks to be able to continue to maintain that rental housing unit, and as well the level of rent that people are paying in those units needs to be affordable for them. And so, I think one of the things that Sonia and I have talked about quite a bit is that one of the ways that we can alleviate the pressure and make sure that the rents are in alignment with what people can afford to pay is by increasing, nonprofit housing and supported housing in non-market housing solutions where the government is involved in supporting the cost of operating those buildings to so that it's either a rent or a rent to own. We've seen other jurisdictions do this, where people can have a safe and secure place to build a home and to build their life around and not be threatened by increasing rents or the profits of companies that are designed to please their shareholders rather than to provide good, secure homes for people.
Adam's really captured it so well. And I think when we look at solutions to get us out of the crises we're in, the solutions can't just be more of what has gotten us here. And the real risk we have right now is there's an enormous amount of wealth and capital concentrated into, hands of people around the world. And they are looking for places to put that wealth. And housing has become like a bank account. And these REITs are a perfect example about that. I as a child, my mom and dad went through a divorce. My mom had 3 kids, single mom, and we were able to live in housing that was operated by the city of Edmonton that was indexed to her income. And
Yeah.
so she had that security and ability to tend to her kids and be able to provide us with really great housing. And I think that is the piece that we should be looking at here is
Yeah.
when we don't have those structures in place, people are unable to really get out of entrenched poverty and the kind of terrible situations that they're finding themselves in. And we really do have to come with different solutions than what we've had. We cannot just build more market housing to get out of this crisis. That is not going to be the solution.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess the terminology is like 30% of your income to rent. And I know my aunt was talking to me about that. She said the same thing, exactly what you mentioned. She grew up and as a single mother, and she said all she paid way back when was 30% of her income, and she was able to get by. Of course, the cost of living was a lot better back then, but she was able to put herself through university, and she became an RN, specialized nurse, and but she was able to find things that were sustainable.
Yeah, and government should be looking at what is its role. Well, its role
Yeah,
is to ensure that people can have the conditions to thrive,
yeah,
and that should be the number one question. Are we, as writ large, are governments ensuring that people have their conditions in which they can contribute back? And this is what we lose. We lose so much when people are stuck and trapped in poverty, and it's a loss for everybody in society,
well,
and we really do have to look at this through that lens of this is not okay for a society to allow these conditions to continue.